He slid the folder across the table like he was doing me a favor. I'd seen that gesture before. 31 years on the family court bench will teach you what a man looks like when he believes he's already won. Pierce sat across from me in Dorinda's law office, with his cufflinks adjusted and his smile easy, the posture of a patient man waiting for a formality to conclude. He'd chosen the chair facing the window. He'd angled his portfolio so the latch faced him. Small things. The kind of small things I'd been cataloging for 5 months without letting myself say what they meant. He had no idea what was waiting on our side of the table. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where it started. To the first October Sunday, he stood in my kitchen doorway and looked out at my land like he was already measuring it. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a family court judge in Knox County, Tennessee, and for most of that time, I believed I had seen every variety of human cunning there was to see. Custody battles, contested wills, neighbors who'd been friends for 40 years. Suddenly fighting over 3 feet of property line. I'd watched grown men weep and liars hold perfectly still, and people who were absolutely certain they were the wronged party. Simultaneously, on both sides of the same table. I thought I knew what deception looked like up close. 4 years ago, my husband passed. Cardiac arrest, sudden, no warning. We'd been married 38 years. He had built our life on this land the same way his father had, and his grandfather before that, quietly, stubbornly, with his hands. 240 acres of Tennessee hill country east of Knoxville, backed up against a ridge of old-growth oak and hickory that turns amber and copper every October like it's been set on fire from the inside. When he died, people asked if I was going to sell. I told them the same thing I had told him the year we bought out his cousin's share. This land isn't for selling, it's for staying. Our daughter Lacey had grown up running those hills barefoot. She's 29 now, a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital in Nashville. Careful, patient, the kind of person who notices the small things and doesn't say anything until she's certain. She'd been cautious about relationships since a painful experience in her mid-20s, the kind that makes a person take their time with trust. So, when she called me last September, breathless and laughing, to tell me she'd finally met someone she believed in, I was glad for her. I wanted that for her. I wanted her to have what her father and I had had. Pierce arrived at my door the following weekend with a bottle of good Tennessee whiskey and a smile that appeared a half-second too quickly. Handsome in that deliberate way that requires upkeep. Dark hair, a nice watch, the kind of shirt that costs more than it looks like it costs. He shook my hand and said my daughter had told him everything about this place. His eyes went to the window before he finished the sentence. I told myself I was imagining things. The first question came at dinner, tucked in between asking about my years on the bench and complimenting my cornbread, delivered with the ease of a man who had practiced making things sound casual. Property values out this way have really gone through the roof, haven't they? With Knoxville growing the way it is. I suppose they have, I said. 200 and some acres out here. That's a serious asset. He said it like he was paying me a compliment, like he was helping me notice something. I said it was home. Lacey changed the subject, and I let her. The second question came at Thanksgiving. We were on the back porch after dinner, watching the last light leave the ridge, and Pierce had his arm around my daughter and a whiskey in his hand, and he looked comfortable. Too comfortable. The way a man looks in a room he's already decided belongs to him. Have you given much thought to what you'd do with all this if things ever got complicated? He kept his eyes on the tree line. A woman living alone on this much land. It's a lot to manage without a partner. I was a judge for 31 years. I know when a question isn't a question. I manage fine, I said. He nodded, like I'd confirmed something. By his 4th visit in January, Pierce had begun steering conversations towards estate planning. Gently, methodically, the way water finds a crack in old concrete. He mentioned knowing a financial planner in Nashville, He said something about living trusts being the smart move for people with significant property holdings, that it was just responsible planning, that he only brought it up because he cared about our family's future. He said it as though he were doing me a kindness by thinking of these things so I didn't have to. He proposed to Lacey in February. She called me at 9 in the morning, crying happy tears. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone against my ear and tried to feel what she was feeling. I wanted to. Something in my chest wouldn't move. I called Dorinda the next morning. Dorinda has been my property attorney for 22 years. She's blunt the way good attorneys are. No wasted words, no softened bad news. When I laid out Pierce's pattern of questions, she listened from start to finish without interrupting. The silence after I finished lasted long enough that I started to wonder if I was being unreasonable. "How long has he been in your daughter's life?" she asked. 5 months. And he's already steering the conversation toward living trusts. Twice that I recall directly, maybe 3 times. "Give me a week," she said. I went about my days. Pierce came to dinner once more during that stretch. March, cool evening, the first tree frogs starting up by the creek. He was warm and attentive and helped clear the table without being asked. I watched him move through my kitchen with the ease of a man who felt at home, and I thought, very clearly, "You are very good at this." He offered to make coffee. I declined. Dorinda called on a Thursday and told me to come to her office. Not over the phone. That alone told me something. The folder she placed in front of me that afternoon was 3 inches thick. Pierce Dunbar was not his name. His real name was Boyd Sutter. He'd changed it legally in Davidson County in 2018. Before that, he'd been connected to a deed fraud case in Lowndes County, Georgia, a civil judgment outstanding and never satisfied, one that technically made him a fugitive from a court order. The fraud had involved a 67-year-old widow, recently bereaved. He had attempted to transfer her property into a trust with himself as sole managing trustee. Her son had discovered it before the paperwork cleared. The family had paid Boyd Sutter to go away and sign a non-disclosure agreement, easier than the publicity of a trial. Dorinda set a second page in front of me. A photograph taken at some kind of county hearing. A man in his mid-50s, jaw tight, eyes red with fury and grief, and something that looked like the specific despair of a man who has run out of options. Crawford Sutter. I knew that name. I had ruled on that case. It was 2009. Crawford Sutter had illegally subdivided protected watershed land in Anderson County. Land he'd owned for years, but was explicitly prohibited from developing under conservation easements he had agreed to at purchase. He appealed when the county moved to reclaim the parcel. I presided. The law was unambiguous. I ruled for the county. He lost 180 acres his father had left him. Crawford Sutter died of a cardiac event in 2011. Boyd Sutter was 19 years old when he watched his father lose that land in my courtroom. He was 21 when he buried him. I sat in Dorinda's office with the photograph between my hands and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not guilt, because I had applied the law as it was written, but a different weight. The terrible straight line between a legal ruling and a young man who had decided that line had destroyed everything he had, and who had spent 14 years determining what he intended to do about it. He had found Lacey deliberately, researched her, introduced himself into her life, proposed, set a wedding date. 5 months of charm and patience and carefully placed questions, all of it leading to one moment. Me at a table, signing my name to papers that would hand him everything my husband had spent his life building. Not just the land, the legacy, the proof that Philip's life had meant something. I thought about Lacey at my kitchen table, laughing at something Pierce had said, tilting her head toward him, the way she used to tilt toward her father. She didn't know she was being used as a key. Dorinda connected me with Holt, a private investigator who had spent 17 years with the Knox County Sheriff's Office before going independent. He was methodical and unhurried, and he found things quickly. A second alias Boyd had used in 2016 a pattern of targeting widowed women with significant rural property, and a younger brother in Nashville who had reportedly assisted in drafting the Georgia documents. We had 2 weeks until the prenuptial meeting, which Pierce himself had proposed, framing it as his idea, proof of his good intentions. He had suggested they use his attorney. He had suggested the agenda include an estate planning component. He was going to bring the living trust documents to that meeting. He expected me to sign them. If you've stayed this long, I want to hear from you. Did you see it coming, or did he almost fool you too? Comment below. But stay, because what happened at that prenup meeting is something I think every mother and daughter should hear. I called Lacey on a Tuesday evening. I needed to hear her voice, and I needed to say nothing that would alert Pierce if he was listening. She sounded tired in a way that went beyond a long shift. She said, "Mom, I left my good pearl earrings at your house, the ones Daddy gave me. Can I come by tomorrow night?" We had not spoken about earrings, not once in the past month, and Lacey has never once driven 2 hours on a weeknight for a pair of earrings. "Of course," I said, "come for dinner." She arrived just after 6, and we stayed on the porch until the last light left the ridge. Then she told me. 3 weeks earlier, she'd been at Pierce's apartment, using his laptop to print seating charts while he ran an errand. The printer was slow. She'd clicked on the downloads folder out of habit, scanning for the file she needed. A different document caught her eye, a living trust agreement. Her mother's name at the top as grantor, Pierce's name as sole managing trustee. A clause she read 3 times. The trustee was authorized to liquidate real property holdings for the long-term welfare and security of the beneficiary at the trustee's discretion. She had photographed every page before the printer finished. She'd spent 3 weeks carrying it, telling herself she'd misread it, telling herself she loved him enough to give him the benefit of some doubt she couldn't quite manufacture. Driving back to Nashville each Sunday, thinking she'd say something that evening, then not saying it. She leaned against the porch railing with her arms crossed over herself and said, "Mom, I brought him here. I let him in." I took both her hands in mine. They were shaking finely, the way hands shake when a person has held something very still for too long. "You didn't know," I said. "I didn't know, not for certain, until I started looking." Then I told her everything. Crawford Sutter, the 2009 ruling, Boyd's real name, his Georgia record, the widow in Lowndes County who had almost lost her land the same way. We talked until nearly 11. The frogs were loud out by the creek, and an owl called twice from somewhere on the ridge and went quiet. When Lacey finally spoke again, the grief in her voice had shifted. Something else had taken the top position. "What do we do?" she asked. "We let him come to the meeting," I said, "and we're ready." The prenuptial meeting was scheduled for a Friday at 11 in the morning at Dorinda's office downtown. Pierce arrived exactly on time. Punctuality is part of the performance for men like him. It signals reliability. It signals investment. It signals that he takes this seriously. He kissed Lacey's cheek in the lobby and shook Dorinda's hand, and smiled at me with the warmth of a man who had rehearsed warmth until it looked natural. He'd brought a leather portfolio. I could see the edge of a folder inside it when he set it on the conference table. Dorinda opened the meeting calmly, reviewing the prenuptial terms Pierce had submitted the previous week. He listened with his hands folded, nodding at the right moments, using phrases like, "I just want to make sure Lacey is protected, and I think transparency is the foundation of any good marriage." He was good. I will give him that. 31 years in courtrooms, and he was still good enough that I had to remind myself what I knew. Then he reached into the portfolio. "Since we're all here together," he said, "this might be the ideal time to address the estate planning component." He slid the folder across the table toward me with both hands. The way someone passes you something they expect you to be grateful for. I had these drafted with your situation in mind. A living trust. It's really the most sensible structure for a property like yours. Protects everything cleanly for Lacey's future. He had the look I'd seen across 3 decades of courtroom tables. The look of a man presenting something dressed as generosity that is, in its bones, a trap. I didn't open the folder. Before we look at those, I said, I'd like to introduce someone. Holt came in from the adjoining room. Behind him came Deputy Annalise Cord from the Knox County Sheriff's Office in plain clothes, badge on her belt where he could see it. Pierce's smile held for 3 seconds. I counted. Boyd, I said. Not Pierce, Boyd. The smile came apart. Dorinda opened our folder and laid the contents across the table 1 page at a time. The Georgia civil judgment, the outstanding court order, the record of the legal name change. The screenshots Lacey had taken, every page of the living trust he'd had drafted in my name, printed and dated, and arranged in order. Your father's case, I said quietly. I remember it. I'm sorry for what that loss did to your family. Truly. But I have applied the law correctly. Your father had agreed to those easements at purchase. He violated them. The ruling was not personal. Something crossed his face that I hadn't anticipated. Not calculation. For 1 fraction of a moment, something that looked about 19 years old. Raw and unresolved and still so certain it had been wronged. Then it closed over. You can't prove intent, he said. His voice was still controlled. We don't need to, Dorinda said. The Georgia judgment establishes the pattern, and the document your fiancé photographed on your laptop establishes the attempt. Lacey set her phone on the table, screen up, the screenshots visible to everyone in the room. Pierce looked at her. I think he had genuinely believed she didn't know, that she was still in his mind, a door he could open whenever he needed to. The assumption that she'd been too trusting to look, too in love to question. She met his eyes without any expression except steadiness. She had her father's stillness, that refusal to flinch when someone needs you not to. I had never been more proud of her. Deputy Cord stepped forward. Boyd Sutter was arrested on the outstanding Georgia civil contempt order and booked on new charges of attempted deed fraud in Tennessee. His brother, who had helped draft the living trust and was parked down the street waiting for a phone call that would not come, was picked up within the hour. I stood outside Dorinda's building in the March sunshine and watched the deputy walk Boyd Sutter toward the patrol car. I thought about his father in that Anderson County hearing room in 2009, his face full of fury and ruin. I thought about the 19-year-old boy who had been in that room watching. I thought about how grief, when it goes unprocessed for long enough, can calcify into something that feels like purpose and leads somewhere entirely different. I did not feel sorry for the man he had become, but for the boy he had been. Yes, a little. That is not the same as forgiving what the man chose to do with all those years. Lacey and I sat in Dorinda's conference room after the others had cleared out. She was quiet for a long time, looking at the table. Do you feel sorry for him at all? She finally asked. Knowing about his father? I thought about it honestly. I feel sorry for who he was at 19, I said. I don't feel sorry for who he decided to be at 35. She nodded slowly. I'm going to need some time, she said. Take all of it, I said. I'm not going anywhere. 4 months later, we sat on the back porch in the last heat of a July evening. The ridge soft and green behind us, the way it only gets in midsummer, when everything has grown in full and the light comes through it, like the land is lit from underneath. Lacey had moved back home for a stretch. Seeing a therapist in Knoxville twice a week, sleeping in her old room with the window cracked, the way she'd always liked it. She'd gone back to work. Last week, she'd walked to the top of the ridge alone for the first time and come back down, looking like a person who had set something heavy down. Boyd Sutter pled guilty in May. 18 months on the Georgia contempt order, with the Tennessee fraud charges proceeding separately. His brother received a lesser sentence. I still hadn't cleared my husband's study. I wasn't ready for that. But I had started a new garden bed along the south fence line, the one that faces the ridge, where he'd always said we should put something. Black-eyed Susans and coneflowers, the kind that winter over and come back on their own each spring without being asked. Lacey asked me one evening why I hadn't told her sooner what I'd found. "Because you deserve to see the proof yourself," I said. "Not just take my word for it. And because you deserve to make the choice with your eyes fully open, not because I made it for you." She was quiet for a moment. "I found the document myself," she said. "I know," I said. "That's exactly who you are." She leaned her shoulder against mine the way she had when she was small and tired, and the day had run long. The tree frogs were starting up by the creek. The ridge was catching the last of the afternoon light, amber and copper, the way it always does in July, when the sun comes down low over the hills. This land is not for selling. My husband knew that. My daughter knows it now. And Boyd Sutter, whatever name he chooses next, wherever he lands, never understood that some things don't have a number attached to them. They have a history. They have a woman who spent 31 years learning exactly how to protect what matters. He picked the wrong family.